Hey there, and welcome back to another episode of the B2B Marketing Asia podcast. I'm your host, Joe Escobedo, and joining me today is Vartika, who heads up global marketing at Yellow.ai. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, really excited because last time we spoke, you dropped some incredible stats on me in terms of the growth of the organization. So you talked about how you've grown from 10 to 1,000 customers in 2.5 years, which is mind boggling. So firstly, congratulations.
Thank you so much, Joe.
Yeah, next, I'd love to hear a little bit more behind the process.
Sure. We started out about 2.5, 3 years ago, wherein conversational apps, your Facebook, WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, all of these were pretty much becoming more and more mass. More and more people were adopting these channels. And that is where we saw that there'll be a big gap in how the enterprises are today engaging with their customers, and whereas how their customers would like to interact a few years down the line. So it was a pretty new product back then. And now it's so mass, right? And this whole growth from 10 to 1,000 is also a reflection of how fast the market overall has moved. And of course, within that market, we've taken a lion's share of that growth. So talking about the reasons for, why the entire growth itself of conversational AI platforms happened. One was because across the globe, the entire mobile internet user behavior was maturing. There were a lot more mobile internet users that were hopping on and who not only wanted to interact with their friends and family, but also brands. And the other part is about socially and culturally how JPAC markets are. We're a lot more conversational. We're a lot more touch and feel market. So that is where building these lasting relationships for enterprises and SMBs also became very important. So I would say it's a mix of the market force and the right product at the right time to the right people. So I would say those were the right things added together, leading to this entire growth.
I think you're way too modest, I think, based on our previous conversation. And there's a lot of cool things you're doing and a lot of fundamental things that you're doing. One of which we talked about last time is really consumer research. And I know you guys have done an incredible job of doing that. So I'd love to hear, what was your process just finding out more about the market? You talked about you entered early. How did you even start that process?
So when I started marketing at Yellow.ai, we were largely focused on the India market. And then we said, hey, Google Ads has this great thing of launching anywhere in the world. Let's see what happens. And, just like that, we launched in Southeast Asia, Middle East, Europe, US. I started getting feedback from the market, from what ads people are clicking on, to what is the engagement further on the landing page, or even so on the messaging. And what we did was not a lot of research. Honestly, I think startups don't give you so much time for research. They're pretty cruel. So the way we went about it, Joe, was we just launched certain campaigns and started learning on the go. And what we realized is that the messaging that we were using in India was, more of automation first. And that message did not really work that well in Indonesia specifically. And that's when we thought, okay, maybe Google as a channel doesn't work. Let's try Facebook. Let's try LinkedIn. Let's try XYZ. It was the same answer. And that's when we wanted to fail fast, but fail cheap as well. So we spent about 2 weeks advertising, and then we learned from a few people who had actually signed up through those ads. We learned that they actually don't like the whole messaging of automation first. They say, hey, I want to keep my conversations with our customers live and be in touch with them. And automation looked scary, looked like you're far removed from your customers. From the entire messaging of don't desk it, automate it, we went more to a messaging of saying the humane CX that your brand needs. So those were some of the tweaks that we did on the go. And trust me, even today, I don't think we know every market or any market to the greatest depth that's available. So we do a lot of these experiments, and thanks to the entire digital marketing domain, you can actually run these pretty fast and tweak things on the go.
Yeah, so there's a great insight there for the listeners. One of which is you mentioned that you do the research, so you fail fast, fail cheap, but also the messaging is really important because you talked about trying different channels. And this is a misconception, I think, with a lot of B2B marketers, that they think, hey, why isn't Google working? Or why isn't LinkedIn? Why isn't Facebook working? But when in reality, the messaging, as you said, may not be on par with what the market wants. So that way you're just spending the wrong kind of money in the wrong kind of places, without having a clear message. So I think that's a good advice for everyone here as well.
Absolutely. And Joey, you would imagine Singapore and Indonesia and Malaysia are so close to each other, but all three markets operate very differently. And that's been one of the biggest learnings. And instead of just relying on advertising, our teams actually went and forged local partnerships. We have a partnership with Accenture, which is a global firm. We also have local partners like Dell in Indonesia. So those were also really helpful in, helping us understand the market or the go-to-market as well. So the observation that I've had is that Singapore acts more like US, whereas Indonesia acts more like Middle East. The channels are very different. In Vietnam, Cambodia, it's more WeChat. In Indonesia, it's more WhatsApp. So there are a lot of these nuances. And as a CPaaS player or as a conversational AI platform, you can just go and say, hey, automate on any channel. At some points, you get people in because of the channel that, okay, you want to engage with your customers on, say, WhatsApp. And sometimes you get them in because of a benefit, which is save costs or increase engagement. So those were also things which are very different. Like in Singapore, people are more focused on CSAT, whereas in Indonesia, Middle East, India, people are more focused on cost efficiency. So these are continuous learnings. And if anybody here who's listening has some more thoughts about what Indonesia likes, just do type in the comments and we'd love to hear that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would as well too. I think you mentioned two markets that they think quite similar, Singapore and the US. Well, I've been in Singapore for 10 years and then spent most of my life in the US. So I could agree with that to some extent. But you also talked about Indonesia and Middle East being quite similar. So you talked about in terms of messaging, like cost savings. What are some of the other things that you think are unique to some of those markets?
I think the other thing that is unique to Indonesia is it's very much partnership driven and local field staff driven. So in Indonesia, people love to meet you, hear about your company. Like I remember I was in one of our partner wave makers office and we wanted to have an awareness day. And more than 100 people turned up there and wanted to engage. Okay, what is conversational AI doing? What are you doing from India? What's your business bringing onto the table? So I found that people really want to meet you, understand what you're doing, and then build a relationship. So I would say it's a very high touch and high engagement market. And in terms of the other similarity, I would say is, going through local vendors and partners. And that again is taking a stem from how people want to interact with local folks and local partners. In fact, we've also built a team of about 12 members in across SAF. And also looking at hiring some folks in the content marketing team within Yellow.ai's marketing team in Indonesia. So I feel locally understanding the market and investing in the market, not just from a product perspective, but even from a GPM perspective is really helpful. So that none of the public libraries that were actually having Bahasa directories like on Microsoft or something, that great. And whereas people on WhatsApp are always chatting in Bahasa, so we actually had to go and build the entire Bahasa library. So, while we were investing on product, we also invested in partnerships and marketing. So it's that joint effort going together to market that really helped us win.
Yeah, so if I heard that correctly, it's doing it at two levels, one of which is like the high level marketing and product, and the other is drilling down more in terms of the specific market, as you said, but bringing in specific partners, making sure you have that local flavor, because you talked about obviously language plays a big role. And I'm guessing in the Middle East, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, where you almost need to have someone who speaks the native language, who understands the native culture in order to get things going, it sounds like.
Absolutely. That's super correct. And, so much so that we also invested in building a website in Bahasa. And we started promoting the Bahasa website in Indonesia. But we were pleasantly surprised that the English one was still converting more. Sometimes we take this hunch that, okay, everybody wants to talk in local languages. Let's build all our assets in there. And in fact, the interaction hasn't been so good. So maybe the B2B community is okay getting information in English, but when they want to talk to their customers, it has to be Bahasa. So we're still learning. Our Bahasa website is still live. And we actually ran this entire A/B test for the same keyword, same ad. We would run an English ad and a Bahasa ad with the Bahasa landing page. And yeah, that experiment was good. In fact, they told us rather than going and building a full website in a local language, maybe we could have done these smaller tweaks and then learned from that. But yeah, it's a surprising market.
Yeah. So if I heard that correctly, even for the ads, you mentioned you ran ads in both Bahasa and English, and the English ones outperform versus Bahasa.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm surprised as well. And maybe I think that, okay, maybe our Bahasa copy is not that great, and maybe we need to really better that to get the click rate. So we actually went and invested in getting a copywriter in Bahasa. So all of those things were in place. So I'm not saying that we will junk that entire website, but it's just important to see as a startup when you have limited resources where you want to grow and where you want to invest more. It's really a nice and pleasant surprise. And I'm glad it's just a website which we can turn off, turn on whenever we want. But we'll be still investing a lot more, especially on the content part, the white papers and all of that. So when it's long form content, I think people are more comfortable in Bahasa. And if it's short form, if it's like an ad, that's my hypothesis. Maybe English is okay.
Very interesting. I wouldn't have thought about that, but I guess at least coming from when I was in China, people feel comfortable reading in English, but maybe feel more comfortable speaking. So that might be one of the reasons that because you talked about the high touch and the meet and greets, obviously they feel more comfortable speaking in Bahasa, but maybe in terms of reading in many markets, they feel like it's okay. That's actually an interesting insight that is counterintuitive to a lot of kind of common
Yeah.
local and regional marketing because they say, okay, you have to go super local. You have to have local faces and local languages. But you're saying actually, well, in our experiments, that is actually the opposite in some markets. So that's fascinating. Was that the case in other markets as well, or are you still testing?
Surprise. Only Indonesia is unique. We have our website in Bahasa, Malay, Spanish, Portuguese, and Japanese. And only Indonesia is the exception.
Only Indonesia. Okay, that is fascinating. So it sounds like for the most part the rule is correct, but in some markets it's worth testing. And I think it's smart, like you said, testing it first in ads. Going back to your thing about testing everything first, making sure which ones perform better, which language, and then building content off the back of that. So I think that's great advice for everyone. Another thing that you talked about, which I want to get more of your thoughts about, is around because you're doing it globally, as you talked about. How do you prioritize, particularly from a content perspective? Because you mentioned there's some similarities in market preferences, like cost efficiencies in Indonesia and the Middle East and maybe India, for example. How do you actually align everything, or how do you decide what gets priority when you're doing it from a global perspective?
I really wish I had a very fancy answer to this, but I don't. But what we have in the org is every geography, we name it a profit and loss center. So let's say there's Southeast Asia 1, Southeast Asia 2, there's Middle East, India, US, Europe. And then all of these regions have their own revenue targets. And basis that, I would say we would pick, okay, which market to build what for. So, for example, WhatsApp as a product is very popular in Indonesia, also Middle East as well, and India. So there we would actually say, okay, you can hit three birds with one stone. So take this up first. So I would say that is one approach. And why WhatsApp is because of the search volume, because of the adoption. And then when we are looking at the employee experience, let's say HR automation or ITSM automation, most business leaders and decision makers are all right to interact in English. So I would say that would become the second priority. So we take up all markets into consideration and see what would help make the quickest wins. And then we get into customizations. For example, when we make a content marketing paper for, let's say, WhatsApp, and we launch it in 4 markets, then we get into building another one for Japan, which would be more focused on line. And then similarly for WeChat for Cambodia, and similarly for Apple Business Chat for the US and Europe. So I would say the first thing to do is, okay, what can be like your easy win? Because it's really important for marketers to see that win as well before investing too much time. So let's say a content marketer has been working on a white paper and it's launched and it's getting 100 leads. That's better than first launching something which might get 4 or 5 leads. So it's a mix of market requirement and demotivation, I would say. So that's how we're going about it right now. But I'm sure there are a number of better ways to do it and we'll improve as we go.
I think it's super smart thinking about it from a commercial point of view. You talked about looking at priority markets in terms of like their revenue targets and then seeing how you can help those markets achieve it. I think that's something that a lot of marketers don't necessarily do. They jump straight into the marketing side, but without thinking about the commercial or the revenue side. So I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why you guys have grown so quickly is you understand not only market preferences and content and stuff like that, but you also understand the commercial growth side and what's actually necessary to grow that. So that's number one. The second thing you talked about is topics that have maybe appeal in multiple markets. So instead of just having one that only appeals to Japan, you talked about WhatsApp being prevalent in multiple markets. And therefore, you're creating something that's going to, like you said, kill one bird with three stones. It's ticking multiple boxes. Something I used to recommend for my clients is just having, and you probably have done this already in your head, it's like a simple matrix. So you have the markets, and then you have, in your case, like the topics, and then you say, okay, which ones are relevant? And that way it's very clear cut. So if the management team asks you, hey, why did you come up with this? Or why did you decide to do this? It's okay, here's key markets. Here's the topics that are relevant to them. Here's a matrix, one pager. There you go. So it explains that scenario that they
Absolutely.
might have for you.
Absolutely. We've also had to, in our English website itself, have one for US, one for UK, and one for Australia. So we never thought that we'll get into that complication because even in the ads, if you don't write Australian style English, they won't click on it. Those were things like,
Um,
I was like, okay, people are hard. You got to be like really customized and personalized. And as an AI company, we are all about talking about customer experience and personalization. So it's almost like eat your own pot and eat your own dog food. Like you also have to be. So I think with a lot of more people after we raised our Series C, we recently got into the Gartner MQ. There's been a lot of inbound interest in people joining the team as well. So that really helps. And I would say in all this growth, one thing that is the hardest is getting the right people on board.
mm.
And and really as a company, we've got like this whole process wherein we interview. There'll be 3 rounds of interviews. We want to keep it extremely short. But we want to be definitely sure that person that we're hiring, we can actually build a career for them, help them make a larger impact. So I would say that for us, hiring in Southeast Asia was also very difficult until we actually partnered with some companies like True Search and some local headhunters. So that has been, really helpful. Like when I was reaching out to people directly through LinkedIn, they're like, okay, so where in Jakarta are you? I'm like, no, I'm in India, in Bangalore. So like, so no office, no work. Like, so that's when we went and opened local offices as well and set up teams. So I would say, yeah, people definitely help you. And all of these ideas that I'm talking about is not really just coming from me. It's from a team of 30 plus people who work behind this whole engine.
Yeah, I can imagine. But like I said, they have a smart leader at the helm. So they're quite lucky in that respect. One thing I want to just circle back on is you talked about having differences in UK, US, and even Australia. Is that as just simple as like the way the words are written? For example, like changing S to Z, or do you like even change certain words to make it more US centric or more Australian centric? If that makes sense. We use like
Yeah.
friends and mates and things like little things like that. Do you get down to that subtlety, and or if so, how deep do you go?
Okay. The US is just so bold, right? You can't just say, hey, we're the leading company. Just shout out loud, you are the leader. That's what they want, like fierce and bold messaging. India, people want to be more humble. They're like, oh, this is how we could help your organization with our organization kind of a messaging. And with Australia, it's more like, let's do some cool stuff together, mate, like how you mentioned. So I would say it goes differently in the whole messaging is the same thing you're selling. But first the messaging and then I think the language and the phonetics. And not just that, it also goes into who are the reps that are talking to them. If you advertise in Australia and then you have somebody talking in a different accent, it doesn't work. So that is where we've had to also expand our team across the globe. So now we have, I think, 6 offices across the globe, but actually team members sitting out of 20 plus countries. So I would say it's Joe from starts from the top messaging and then goes all the way to the selling. We're also looking at localizing our entire platform so that when people log into Yellow.ai, they can actually build a bot in Bahasa or Japanese or in Spanish and Portuguese. Some time away, but that's the vision.
Very cool. We talked about last time SDRs, and most startups, as much as I love content, are very SDR driven in their growth. And you mentioned something, I don't want to give it away because the way you position it was extremely clever. I'll give a hint for the audience is not ridiculing people, which I think most marketers tend to do. They say, hey, you're not doing this. Here's how you're staying behind and so on. But you've had a nice little, I guess, psychological spin to it, which I thought was very clever and it still stuck with me. So maybe you could share a little bit more. I'll zip it up and maybe you could share a bit more about that.
I really don't know which part of it you're referring to, but I'll try. So, within the Indonesia market and in the JPAC market, we've seen that other businesses want to see that you're there for the long run. They definitely are a very high touch, high feel for markets. They want to see you in person, interact, have lunches and dinners, and talk about things that are about you and then come to work. One of the funny things that I said, I think last time was that in Indonesia, people are looking at marrying you and not like a one night stand. They don't want like a quick conversation. They actually want to build a relationship with you. And who best to do that than other team members? So that's where we built a very SDR heavy market as well in the region. And there are a lot of times when people are stuck and they're like, okay, my Salesforce integration is not working. Now it's not really under our purview, but as a company which is sitting as a layer, as a conversational AI layer, you need to know what's above what and what's below both. And that's where a lot of times you'll see our sales team members, get these small little nice notes on LinkedIn saying that, hey, you saved the day. And I was just so stuck doing this integration. It's more about going above and beyond what's possible. So I would say, yeah, our SDRs are wedded to our prospects and customers.
Yeah, I think that was aligned with what I was thinking about last time because most SDRs, they just think of the quick wins and stuff like that or the quick sale, but you're saying build a longer relationship. And also the point you made last time of not coming and saying, hey, we're going to completely replace it, but we're going to add on top of what you're currently doing. Because if you think about it from a client's point of view, if they've invested, say, $100,000, $1 million in a particular tech product and it's just not working, there's a couple different ways you can go about it. First of which is you can provide some kind of advice, like you said, integration to fix that. And the second thing you can do is to say, hey, here's something you could do to layer on top of that to make it even more efficient. That might help with some of the issues you're having, which I thought was a very clever way of going about it and quite counterintuitive because everyone wants to come in and say, this, what you have is terrible. You need to replace it all and go with us because your stuff is crap. But then it doesn't help the person on the other side who says, hey, I spent a lot of time investing in this and figuring it out. And now you're telling me it's crap. Like, how it doesn't help me personally. So I thought that was a nice little kind of
Yeah.
psychological hook you guys are doing as well, too.
No, absolutely. Even as a product line, it's not about replacing, like eventually, and there will be a natural death of the CRM wherein you don't just need a place to store data, but you want data to be able to make sense to even the customers and even to the reps. So that's where we feel that will be a gradual end. And that what is that gradual? Is it 5 years, 8 years, maybe it's 10? Going into an enterprise and saying, hey, this 800K deal that you did, now just throw that and here's what, you should use. It's never going to work in any B2B scenario. So I think a lot of smart B2B companies definitely build that entire layer of integration for the same reason. Don't replace, but better what you already have.
Exactly. Vartika, I could speak with you all day, but maybe we have one last tip. What do you think has been the biggest contributing factor to that growth from 10 customers to 1,000 in 2.5 years? What was something that you would want to share with the rest of the B2B marketing community?
This is a very honest confession. I started out exactly thinking that, hey, marketers rock and sales team don't reach out to the leads. So we continued that for 5, 6 months. And then we just got together and see, we have to solve this problem. You cannot just have an outbound motion and not everything can come onto the table inbound. So that is where I would say 5 years back, if somebody told me that salespeople are your best friends, that you have to be their best friends, life would have been easier. But I would say that's the biggest takeaway because they're on ground. They hear customers a lot more. So I even went to the lens of going for customer meetings. Completely, I was shut up and I would just listen. And that really helped me understand the market, understand what is the sales team's bottleneck. So I think once you become somebody who can solve the challenges of not just the customer, but also your sales team, that is when you start seeing success in a B2B company. So I'd say go say hello to all your sales folks and be nice to them.
For sure. And I think that's something I learned when I was at LinkedIn. It was quite a kind of an epiphany for me is they said, your client is not the client, meaning the end customer. I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, your marketing, your client is the sales team. It's your job to help enable them to sell more, to sell better, and to sell more effectively. That's what your job is. And I thought that was a very fascinating way of thinking about it, because traditionally you think, okay, marketing is separated from a lot of times from the customer. And who's always in the middle? It's always a salesperson. They're the person on the ground, the person closing the deals and so on. So how can you essentially support them such that they can help, like you said, like the clients better? And once again, some brilliant mindset thinking here. So Vartika, thank you so much. I obviously we're going to have to do part 2 because I really enjoyed today's conversation.
Definitely, Joe. It was really fun. And all of these conversations really helped me reflect upon how the last 2 years have gone by. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
So many great insights here today. Feel free to share with your colleagues and the sales team. If you're in marketing, share this episode with your sales colleagues. I'm sure they will love to hear it as well too. So thank you guys so much. We really appreciate the support, and we'll see you next time.